guys, welcome back to the Into the Cosmic. I'm Cosmic, and we're still in the third bedroom until my lighting gets fixed in my room. We are officially done with Deadly Intentions. So, we're gonna that, and now we're on a Great Mistake. Okay, so here's the email. The email. Don't ask. That's my other name. I have like 50 million names. Okay. Okay, y'all. We are gonna get into Great Mistake so far. If you haven't watched the other video, please go back to that video. I do not want you guys to if you haven't watched any of these books, what are you doing at this one? Go to Dead Wrong. Okay? So I'm gonna get started on Great Mistake. I haven't listened to this book yet. So we're gonna be listening to this for the first time together. Okay, let's go.
A Grave Mistake. Blackmore Sisters Paranormal Mystery Series, Volume 6. Written by Leanne Dobbs. Narrated by Hollis McCarthy. Chapter 1. This wasn't the first dead body Morgan Blackmore had seen, nor was it the most gruesome. But for some reason, this body struck ice-cold fear into her heart, like none of the others. It wasn't the look of terror frozen on the guy's face, or the giant burn mark on his chest, indicating he was probably a victim of some kind of paranormal assassin, that had her so frightened.
Oh.
It was the map clutched in his fisted hand. A map that looked eerily similar to one Morgan and her sisters had received in a mysterious letter from their Aunt Eliza. Morgan bent at the waist, her sleek, long black hair dangling in front of her as she strained to get a closer look. Was it the same map? It looked like it, but she didn't have the photographic memory her sister Jolene did, so she did the next best thing. She slipped the cell phone out of her pocket and snapped a picture. As she leaned in, something gooey squished under her boot. Picking her foot up, she recognized it as one of the cone-shaped black licorice candies they sold in the corner store. A black crow. Hey, Morgan, do you mind? Brody Hunter pulled her attention from the smooshed candy.
Cute.
And she straightened to see him standing behind her in his no-quit police uniform, holding up a section of yellow crime scene tape so that it was high enough for someone to duck underneath. He jerked his head toward the area outside the tape, indicating for her to leave. She took one more quick photo, then slipped under the tape. Thanks. She tweaked his cheek and smiled as he blushed. She'd known Brody most of her life. They'd both grown up in Noquit, and since he was the younger brother of Morgan's high school boyfriend, she thought of him like family. Her smile faded as she walked away, glancing down at the photo of the map on her phone. She snugged her black peacoat around her middle to ward off the cool November air, but it did little to stop the chill that crept from her spine and encircled her heart. She glanced back one more time.
So wait, hold up. Hold the phone. Okay. So if you guys were paying attention to the last books, they all take place during the summer. But this one, in particular, takes place during the fall. That's interesting. Okay, let's keep listening.
Wondering who exactly the body was. She knew that the possession of the map indicated they must have come to her seaside town of Noquit, Maine, for a specific reason. A specific reason that had gotten them killed. What she didn't know was if the dead person was friend or foe, or if the killer was still hanging around town. Morgan picked up the pace, her breath coming out in small puffs of condensation, her boots making tracks in the light dusting of snow on the ground as she hurried to her truck. She wasn't sure exactly what was going on, but if her theory about the map was correct, things in her little town were about to heat up dramatically, despite the late fall New England weather. She hopped in the truck, turned the engine over, and put the truck in gear. She didn't let it warm up. She needed to get back home with her discovery and warn her sisters. On the way out of town, the reflection of flashing blue and red lights in her mirror caught her eye. Glancing behind her, she saw them load the body into an ambulance. Her stomach clenched. She had a feeling that might not be the last death this town would see before the year was out. Celeste Blackmore brushed a light dusting of snow off the bench at the edge of the cove. Shoving red leather gloves into her pocket, she sat down and pulled the lobster grilled cheese from its bag, watching a wisp of steam rise in the air. Settling back on the bench, she closed her eyes and bit into the warm sandwich. It was a favorite of hers, and one that she'd only been able to find at Footbridge Lobster, a small lobster shack situated in Perkins Cove, which was a short walk from her home. The sandwich had the perfect combination of taste and texture. Grilled bread gave it a buttery crunch, the cheese added creamy tang, and the large lobster claw situated in the middle supplied the perfect amount of sweetness. Celeste sighed as she settled back on the bench to savor the sandwich. Although it was less than 40 degrees out, she didn't mind. Celeste found the cooler weather invigorating, and she loved her seaside town even more in the off-season when it wasn't crowded with tourists. She chewed happily, looking out over the quaint fisherman's cove. The light dusting of snow would be gone by noon, but right now it gave the place a holiday feel, amplifying the charm of the old lobster boats moored in the cove. But not all the boats had charm, especially not the big black ship moored in the middle that stuck out like a sore thumb. Celeste stared at the ship, the sandwich paused halfway to her mouth. When did that get here? A feeling of uneasiness bloomed in her chest. Noquit was a popular tourist destination in summer, and sometimes people rented mooring space to stay in the cove on their boats, but no one ever did that in winter. Yet here was this big black boat, and obviously someone was staying on it. She watched as a figure appeared on the deck. It was two people, actually, one dressed in a Nordic parka and pushing a tiny white-haired woman bundled in a light blue blanket in a wheelchair. Celeste watched as the woman turned her face toward the sun. She looked frail, sickly. The woman reminded Celeste of her mother, who had been held captive by a maniac for the past 7 years and drained of almost all her health. Thankfully, her mother was recovering, but Celeste couldn't help but wonder about the woman she was looking at now. Had she suffered a similar fate? Finishing the rest of her sandwich, Celeste watched as the woman was wheeled back inside and the door to the cabin shut, blocking any view she might have had of what was going on inside. Maybe the woman was just here convalescing and recovering? Celeste brushed the crumbs from her hand, chastising herself for being so suspicious. She never used to be that way, but the past 2 years had been crazy for her and her sisters, who'd discovered they'd had special paranormal gifts and then come under attack because of them. She'd learned to pay attention to anything out of the ordinary. She stood, and with a glance backward at the boat, started for the large house she and her sisters shared with their mother at the mouth of the entrance to the cove. There was no reason to be suspicious of a new boat in the cove, but she'd keep it in the back of her mind. As Celeste had so recently found, it was better to be safe than sorry. Chapter 2. The Blackmore house had been in Morgan's family for centuries. Built 300 years earlier by Morgan's ancestor, Isaiah Blackmore, it sat on a piece of land with the Atlantic Ocean on one side and the channel to Perkins Cove on the other. The house, now more of a mansion, had started off as a small home and been added to and modernized with each passing generation. Morgan pulled to a stop in the driveway and followed the smell of eggs and bacon into the spacious kitchen, her jaw dropping when she saw a tall, dark, and handsome guy at the stove cooking the breakfast.
Mateo?
Mateo, what are you doing here?
Ew.
Morgan's eyes drifted from Mateo's velvety brown ones to her mother, Joanna's amber ones. Joanna shrugged. He came to visit. Bet you didn't know I could cook, Mateo said, turning his broad shoulders back to the stove. Morgan hadn't known that...
Aw, I'm sorry, guys. This is like... Oh, I have to add him onto the list of characters. Hold up, give me a minute. I'm gonna add him below Cal. Obviously, we're adding it below Cal. Who else will we add below? Mateo. We don't know his last name yet, so... Jolene. Brown eyes. And we're gonna highlight this. There we go. Okay. And then we have to add... I'll add her up to the Blackmore part of it. Right below Joey. Sorry, my mom, like, freaking... Joanna Blackmore. Hazel Eyes. We gotta... Okay. We have everything organized, guys. Okay.
Cooking was one of his talents, and her lips curled as she wondered how her youngest sister Jolene would react when she found out who was preparing breakfast.
Aww.
Mateo had been somewhat of a mystery man, appearing out of nowhere on several occasions to rescue the sisters during the past year. Unbeknownst to them, he had actually been working for a secret agency and was tasked to watch over them. Morgan didn't think he minded that task, especially when it included her sister Jolene. She'd seen the way the two of them looked at each other,
Aww.
and even if neither of them wanted to admit it, there were sparks there. Recently, they'd discovered Mateo had been on an assignment inside the underground laboratory of Dr. Mortimer Bly, a rogue paranormal who had held her mother prisoner for 7 years, trying to drain her powers. Joanna and Mateo had developed a strong friendship, and he'd been instrumental in rescuing her. That probably explained why he'd just popped in unannounced to cook breakfast. Or maybe he wanted an excuse to see Jolene.
Aww.
Is something wrong? Joanna asked. Morgan had been so surprised to see Mateo, she'd almost forgotten about the body with the map. Almost. She held up the phone. I think the relic we've been searching for might be a little closer to home than we originally thought. Mateo spun around. Really?
Mm-hmm.
Morgan nodded and showed them the picture. That looks like the map Eliza sent. Joanna's lips pursed into a thin line, and Morgan worried that her mother wasn't strong enough yet to deal with something like this. When the sisters had received the mysterious letter in the mail, they tried to keep the map from their mother. But Joanna had been adamant about being included in the task of searching for the ancient relics that Dr. Bly was trying to uncover for his own evil purposes. According to what they'd been told, these relics had been infused with paranormal powers by energy masters centuries earlier, and anyone who possessed them would be able to use the power for their own gain. Morgan's Aunt Eliza had sent them a map, which they'd assumed was a clue to one of the relics. Too bad she hadn't indicated where exactly the map pointed to. Morgan and her sisters had assumed it was someplace ancient, like Egypt or near the Mayan ruins. But now that someone had shown up in town with the map, that seemed to indicate they were looking for the relic here in Noquit. Morgan studied her mother, who sat in her wheelchair, head bent, studying the map. For 7 years, she'd thought her mother was dead. They'd been led to believe Joanna had jumped into the sea from the cliffs behind their home. It was a miracle to have her here now, and she was getting stronger every day. When they'd first rescued her, she'd been unable to walk. Her skin had been as wrinkled and brittle as someone almost 3 times her mother's age. Her long hair had been a dank gray, almost devoid of color. Now, Joanna's hair showed streaks of its normal jet black. Her skin was smooth, and she could manage to get out of the wheelchair and into a chair and bed on her own. Joanna's mind was as sharp as ever, and in the few short months she'd been back, it had become obvious to Morgan that her mother was the leader of the group. She could handle this. "Yes, I thought so too," Morgan said. "Where did you get these?" Mateo held the greasy spatula up as he leaned over the phone. "I was at the village food market downtown, picking up a few things, when I noticed flashing blue lights on Beach Street. Normally, I don't pay attention to police business, but my gut instincts told me to investigate." Over the past year, Morgan had learned that her gut instincts were a special gift, and she always paid attention to them. "Someone was killed, and they had the map?" Joanna asked. Morgan nodded. It looked like they were burned, probably with paranormal energy, but I'm sure the police will explain it as something else. "Too bad you didn't snag the map," Mateo said. "Brody kicked me out. I was hoping the picture was enough." "We should print it out and compare it to the one from Eliza. Email it to me." Morgan did as instructed, while Joanna wheeled her chair around and headed for the sitting room next to the kitchen, where they kept a printer and laptop. "What's burning?" Jolene appeared in the doorway. Her
Aw.
brown hair tousled like she'd gotten out of bed without bothering to straighten it, which she probably had. Her light blue eyes grew wide as she noticed Mateo, who had turned his attention back to the stove in order to rescue the bacon from being burnt to a crisp. "Uh-oh, this can't be good." Her brows crept up as she glanced at Morgan for confirmation. "Well, I don't know if Mateo cooking breakfast is good or not, but I did make a discovery downtown that isn't so good." "Oh?" "She found a map," Mateo said, his back still turned. "And you think it has something to do with Eliza's map?" "It looks pretty similar." "Let's see." Jolene held out her hand, and Morgan handed the phone over. Jolene squinted, then used her finger and thumb to enlarge the picture. "It is the same, but it looks like there's an additional part to this one," she said with certainty. Morgan believed that certainty. Jolene had a photographic memory, and if she said it was the same as the other map, you could take that to the bank. "Let me go get the one Eliza sent us." "So, what does this all mean?" Joanna wheeled over with the printout of the map and put it on the shiny granite surface of the kitchen island. Morgan looked down, tilting her head sideways to see it from a different angle. It wasn't the full map, Part of it was inside the dead guy's curled fingers. I'm not sure. But if someone was here with the map, then that seems to indicate they were looking for something right here in Noquit. Jolene returned with the other map, laying it on the island next to the printout. So, the relic Eliza was trying to lead us to could have been here under our noses the whole time? Maybe. Morgan looked at the two maps. They were almost the same. But she didn't recognize it as any place in Noquit. She was studying it so intently that she didn't hear someone enter the kitchen.
Jake?
Hey, who cooked breakfast? Celeste stood in the doorway,
Oh.
staring from the platters of food Mateo was placing on the kitchen island to Mateo, then to Jolene. Her eyes slid back to Mateo. Hi, I didn't know you were here. I just dropped in to see how Joanna was doing. Uh-huh. Celeste took a piece of bacon off the pile and nibbled on the end. Did someone say something was right under our noses? Yes, I found... Morgan started, then stopped. They were missing one sister, and she didn't want to have to tell the story all over again when Fiona showed up. Where's Fiona? Outside, practicing her shotgun rocks. Joanna jerked her head toward the big kitchen window, and Morgan looked out to see her sister standing just outside, her right hand clenched in front of her in a tight fist. Fiona's back was to them. A lavender knit scarf warmed her neck and kept her red hair tucked into the back of her tan shearling jacket.
Oh, where's
Beyond
Chicken
her,
Lou?
the Atlantic Ocean sparkled in the morning sunlight.
Sorry, I can't.
2 years ago, the sisters had been attacked by paranormal bad guys who had been after a treasure Isaiah Blackmore had hidden in caves beneath the house. That's how they'd discovered they'd actually had paranormal abilities themselves. Since then, there had been more attacks, and the sisters had decided to hone their skills so they could be more effective in defending themselves. Fiona had a way with crystals, and Morgan knew Fiona hoped to develop a skill where she could transfer energy to the small stones and then throw them as weapons, causing them to scatter like shotgun shells, which would pepper the enemy senseless. Morgan held her breath as she watched Fiona raise her fist. Then she flung her hand out, her breath visible in the cold air as her fingers flew open and the stones clattered harmlessly to the ground. Looks like she still needs some practice, Celeste said. Jolene tapped on the window to catch her sister's attention and motioned her in. Fiona came in through the kitchen door, stomping her feet and blowing into her ungloved fists. What's up? Her eyes slid to the island. Oh, great. Breakfast's ready. Yeah, that, and Morgan came across a dead body this morning, Jolene said, as she loaded scrambled eggs, bacon, and toast onto a plate. Fiona's left brow inched up. Another one? Morgan rolled her eyes. The sisters had found more than one body in the past couple of years, and it was starting to be a family joke. Except, usually, they were the ones getting blamed for the death. Yeah, at least we aren't suspects this time. Morgan slid the printout of the photo she'd taken across the island toward her. He had this in his hand. Fiona tilted her head to look at it as she shrugged out of her coat. Is it the same as Eliza's? It looks like it. Jolene set the picture next to the map they'd gotten in the mail as they all filled their plates and sat around the island. See, this part matches, but this part looks like a continuation, Jolene said, around a mouthful of egg. What's that? Celeste pointed to a rectangular object on the corner. It looks like a gravestone. I think it is.
Graveyard?
Jolene
Again?
slathered butter on a piece of toast
It's a
and
joke.
held it out to Celeste, who shook her head. You're not eating, dear? Joanna's eyes clouded with worry. Are you sick? Celeste laughed and pointed to the takeout bag she'd tossed in the trash. No, I ate already. My favorite, lobster grilled cheese. Morgan screwed up her face. For breakfast? Sure. It has all the things you're eating. Celeste pointed to the various plates on the island. Protein, dairy, and bread. I got it at the footbridge. That's when I saw the boat. Boat? Joanna, Morgan, and Fiona all asked at once. Yeah, a big black boat was moored in the cove. Odd for this time of year. I'll say, Morgan said. I don't think that's a coincidence, Joanna added. Maybe our dead guy came from there. Celeste pursed her lips. I don't think so. There was an old woman in a wheelchair. At least, I think she was old. Celeste couldn't help but glance at Joanna. Or she could have been a victim of Bly, just like Joanna, Mateo said. Do you think Bly might be here? Morgan reached for a piece of bacon. Hard telling, but someone paranormal is. The dead guy was killed with hot energy. We should check that boat out, Jolene said. But first, we gotta figure out what this map means. Meow. The
Belladonna!
cat, Belladonna, glared at them reproachfully from the doorway, as if she was wondering how they dared eat breakfast without her. Belladonna sauntered over to the trash barrel, stood on her hind legs, and sniffed. Then she stretched to reach her head far enough in so that she could peek inside the bag. After a few seconds, she pulled her head out and slitted her sky-blue eyes at Celeste, clearly annoyed with her for not saving even a morsel of lobster. She then gave the final insult by trotting over to Mateo and sitting adoringly at his feet.
Aww!
Mateo broke off a tiny piece of bacon and held it out for the sleek white cat, who sniffed it thoroughly before gently taking it with her teeth. I don't think she should be eating bacon. Jolene frowned at Mateo. She likes it. Mateo shrugged, then cleared some of their empty plates from the island, putting them in the sink so they could study the maps side by
Like
side.
Mateo, we have to add that in there.
This is Noquit. I don't recognize it, Fiona said. Meow. Belladonna clawed at Mateo's pant leg, and he tossed her another tiny piece of bacon. Jolene turned both maps to face her. It looks like this is the ocean. She pointed to the right side. Celeste stood and leaned over the island to see what Jolene was pointing at. Then you must be holding it upside down, because if it's Noquit, the ocean would be on the east side. Meow wow. Shush, Belladonna. Morgan waved at the persistent cat to shoo her out of the room, but the cat stayed, stretching her neck out as if she was trying to see to the top of the island where the plate of bacon was. I don't know, Jolene said. I think the orientation is right. Maybe this isn't Noquit. Wow! Belladonna jumped up onto the island. Sliding across the length, she grabbed a piece of bacon in her mouth on the way by. Her claws caught on the photo of the map and sent it fluttering off the side as she leaped off the end of the island. She landed almost silently on the floor and then darted out of the room. Hey, you! Fiona yelled after the cat, amidst laughter from Mateo, Celeste, and Jolene.
Oh.
Morgan bent down to pick up the printout of the picture she'd taken earlier that morning. The printout had twisted around and lay upside down on the floor. As Morgan reached for the paper, Joanna's hand shot out and stayed her arm. Wait a minute. I think I know where this is. Chapter 3. I don't know why we can't just go out to the Finch farm and look around. No one's lived there for years, since Thaddeus Finch went into the nursing home, Jolene complained from the back seat of the gray Trailblazer the girls had recently purchased. Fiona half turned from her position in the passenger seat so she could see Jolene. That would be trespassing. Mom was right. We need to ask old Mr. Finch's permission first. You're just crabby because Mateo left. Morgan glanced at Jolene in the rearview mirror to see her sister's reaction to the good-natured teasing. Jolene snorted. Huh. Where did he run off to anyway? And what brought him here? Who knows? Celeste shrugged.
He's
He's
cute.
mysterious. But I have to say, I don't think his appearance and a dead body showing up at the same day are coincidence. Yeah, but if so, why did he leave? Jolene asked. Good question, Morgan replied, as she
Cute.
pulled into the Fiddler's Rest nursing home. I hope Mom is right about the map being the old Finch farm, or this is going to be a huge waste of time. I hear Mr. Finch doesn't even make sense most of the time. Jolene held the glass door to the lobby open and motioned for her sisters to precede her. He might not even know we're here, never mind be aware enough to give us permission to look around his farm. Can I help you? A nurse asked from behind the round desk, just inside the carpeted lobby. We'd like to visit Thaddeus Finch, Morgan said. The nurse's brows rose. Looks like it's Mr. Finch's lucky day. He doesn't usually get so many visitors. So many? Jolene asked. Yes, his nephews were here earlier. Maybe we should come back then. Fiona looked at her sisters questioningly. Oh, they're gone now. I'm sure Mr. Finch would love to see you. He's in room 310. The aide leaned around the desk and gestured to a hall on the left. Just take the elevator over there and follow the signs. Thaddeus Finch's room was bigger than Morgan had expected. It was about 15 by 20, painted in a nice gray blue with a hospital bed in the middle, a wooden bureau on one wall, a big television, and a large window overlooking the woods in the back of the facility. Finch sat in a recliner in the corner. He was a small man with a mop of bushy gray hair. A hand-crocheted afghan in shades of orange and green spread across his lap gave Morgan the impression that Thaddeus was cared for by at least one person. Maybe his nephews. Fiona tapped on his door, pulling his attention from the television. His gray eyes lit up when he saw the 4 girls hovering in the doorway. Finally, you're here to give me my bath. Finch started taking off his shirt, much to Morgan's dismay. No, she waved her hands. We're not here to give you a bath. No? Finch's face collapsed in a disappointed frown. His eyes flitted from one girl to the next, then settled on Celeste. Are you sure? I always was a sucker for blondes. Celeste ran her hands nervously through her short-cropped blonde hair. We're sure. Finch settled back in his chair. Why are you here, then? Now, Mr. Finch, are you being naughty again? A young woman with strawberry blonde hair pulled back in a severe ponytail appeared at the door that led to the room's private bath. What? Thaddeus squinted at her. Potty? No, I don't have to go potty. The girl shot an apologetic look at Morgan and her sisters, then held her hand out. I'm Wendy, Mr. Finch's personal health aide. They introduced themselves, and then Wendy said, Don't mind me, I'll just straighten up over here. She turned and headed toward the bedside table, her thick waist-length hair swishing and flying as if it had a mind of its own. Well, hello there, Thaddeus said brightly, as if he'd just noticed Morgan and her sisters. What can I do for you, lovely girls? We have a favor to ask about your farm, Morgan said. Finch smiled. My farm. Yes, I love that place. Been in the family for generations, you know. Of course, lots of no-quit homes have. He stopped, then frowned at them again. Who did you say you were? We're the Blackmore girls, Morgan said. Morgan, Fiona, Jolene, and Celeste. Oh, yeah. I'd recognize you anywhere. I knew your grandma, and you girls have the same eyes, Finch said, referring to the sky-blue eyes, a Blackmore trait
I
the
thought they were
4
ice
girls
blue.
were lucky enough to have inherited. Finch's eyes clouded, and he looked out the window, then back at the girls. Are you here to give me a bath?
No.
No, Morgan said. We'd like permission to look around your farm. Oh, well, I haven't checked for eggs yet. Excuse me? The hen house. I haven't been out there yet, but if you girls want to look around, go ahead. Well, that's okay. We were actually interested to see if there was a family graveyard. Oh, yeah. Finch rolled his eyes. Scary thing to have in your backyard when you're a kid growing up on a farm. Don't make a grave mistake, my great-granddaddy used to say. He's buried there, you know. Oh, that's nice. Jolene jerked her head toward the door in a signal to her sisters that it was time to go. Yep, my grandpa is in there too, and my daddy. Of course, I had to get special permission to bury them there. Finch's face turned sad. I wonder if I will be buried with them. Probably not. No one left to get special permission. What about your nephews? Morgan asked. Finch looked at her, confusion spreading across his face. Nephews? I don't have any nephews. Chapter 4. I know he said he didn't have any nephews, but he's Looney Tunes. He probably doesn't remember. Jolene's eyes were on her cell phone, her thumbs flying over the letters on the pop-up keyboard as they picked their way through the overgrown area surrounding the Finch farmhouse. We can't just assume his earlier visitors were Bly's men. I mean, he thought we were there to give him a bath, so I don't think he's really in touch with reality. True. I guess we need to check that out, Celeste said. Who are you texting? Jake. I want to tell him to check out that boat you saw in the cove, Jolene said, referring to Jake Cooper, ex-Noquit cop, and Jolene's private investigator boss, as well as Fiona's boyfriend.
Oh.
Good idea. Fiona's ears had perked up at the sound of Jake's name. Which way do we go? Celeste turned in a slow circle, taking in the large area. The farmhouse, with its peeling paint and hanging shutters, was dirty from years of neglect. What had once been a front lawn was a mass of tall grass, turned brown for the winter. To the right was a field ringed by a fence, dotted with broken boards. Next to it, a barn had fallen down decades ago and lay in a mass of boards and shingles. Beyond that sat another pile of debris, a few pieces of charred wood sticking out from the edges. If Finch does have nephews, it looks like they don't take very good care of the place, Morgan observed. I guess Finch didn't either. How long has he been in the nursing home? Celeste asked. I'm not sure, but you know how old people get. They stop taking care of things. This place looks like it's been going the ruin for 30 years. Jolene held up her cell phone that showed an old picture of the farm from better days. But it's a prime piece of land. 20 acres, edged by the ocean to the east and the woods to the north. Fiona frowned. If he had nephews, wouldn't they be keeping it up? It was in his family all these years. It doesn't make sense it would just be going to ruin. Lots of young people can't be bothered with keeping a farm running. They probably plan to get rid of it, but can't sell until Thaddeus dies. Speaking of dying, Morgan said, let's find this graveyard. They started off toward the back of the farmhouse. The noon sun had warmed the day to the mid-40s, and Celeste took off her gloves and shoved them in her pocket as she walked. Beside her, Morgan slowed her pace, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the horizon. Celeste could see her homing in on a spot, and the three sisters waited until Morgan pointed to a hill that backed up to a wooded area. That seems like a likely place. They started toward it at a faster pace now, the shapes of gravestones becoming more visible as they approached. The old graveyard sat in a rectangular area, built up on the top of the hill. It had a great view of the ocean, which Celeste thought was ironic, seeing none of its inhabitants would be able to enjoy it. The family plot was large, ringed by a black iron fence set in a footing of concrete. The area had been built up higher than ground level, and the girls ascended 3 moss-covered concrete steps to get inside. "Now what?" Jolene asked. Morgan shrugged. "I guess we look for a clue." The graveyard turned out to be bigger than it appeared at first. A lot of finches had been buried there, and it was as overgrown as the rest of the farm, which only added to its creepiness. A gigantic, thick old oak tree sat almost dead center, its bare branches spread out several feet in all directions, and Celeste imagined the dark canopy it would create in summer when it was full of leaves. Some of the older slate stones had cracked in half, their tops laying on the ground or leaning up against the remaining part of the stone. The girls' pace slowed as they inspected the stones. Morgan took the lead, and when she slowed and put her hand out, the rest of them stopped. "What is it?" Celeste's neck tingled with awareness. Did Morgan sense someone watching them? "I thought I saw someone." Morgan nodded toward the woods. Celeste squinted in that direction, but all she saw was tree trunks. "I don't see anyone." "Maybe it's his nephews," Jolene added. Morgan shrugged and turned away from the wooded area. "I'm probably just jittery. Let's keep moving, but stay alert. We don't want to get surprised in an attack." Celeste turned her attention toward the graves, scanning for anything that might be a clue. The stones themselves were mostly older. She guessed the ones in the back dated to the 1700s, when family plots were more common. 2 stones near the front were newer, and she assumed those belonged to Finch's father and grandfather. The older stones were the most interesting. Some were plain slate slabs, rounded at the top and chiseled with images of angels, weeping willows, and doves. A few of them, in white limestone, had images in high relief. Celeste paused to run her fingertips over the gritty surface of an angel's wings on one of the stones. "So, what exactly are we looking for?" Celeste asked as she studied the stone. "Good question." Jolene looked around. "Got any vibes, Morgan?" But Morgan was busy staring at something behind them. "Huh?" Morgan spun around to face them. "Geez, you're making me nervous." Fiona bent down and scooped up a handful of stones, closing her fist around them for a second, then opening it up a little and peeking inside. Celeste could see disappointment on her face, but Fiona closed her fist and kept the stones inside. "Do you have any sixth sense about where to look so we can narrow down our search?" Jolene asked. "I don't. I guess we should spread out and see if there is a clue on any of the graves." "What about the mausoleum?" Fiona angled her head toward a cement doorway that was lower than the main graveyard and set into a mound of earth on the east side. It was small and not terribly ornate. The giant iron hinges that held the doors shut, and the fact that it was inside the earth, made entering it a less than appealing prospect. Morgan shook her head. "I don't think the clue is in there. Besides, it's clearly locked, and it looks creepy inside." "Yeah, let's stick to looking around out here first, then maybe we can look in there." Jolene glanced over at the structure. "That lock looks easy enough to pick." "It would help if we knew what kind of clue we were looking for," Fiona said, as the girls started to spread out amongst the graves. "No kidding." Celeste immersed herself in looking at the graves, searching for anything that stuck out. What would the clue be? One of the images engraved into the headstone? Some wording in one of the epitaphs? She tuned everything else out while she searched, moving deeper into the cemetery. In the back of the cemetery, Celeste could see a couple of chest tombs, their rounded tops making them look like concrete coffins sitting above ground. The stones back here were more ornately carved, as were the tombs. A wispy mass swirling from behind one of the stones caught her eye, and she sucked in a breath. She recognized the swirling shape. It was a ghost. "About time you got here," the ghost said. She shouldn't have been surprised to find a ghost in a graveyard, and it didn't startle her as much as it might have. Celeste was getting used to seeing ghosts. She'd been seeing them for a while now. Talking to the dead was her special gift. "You knew I was coming?" she asked the wispy swirl that was now solidifying into the shape of a man. "Of course. I've been here a long time with Henry and Red." The ghost nodded toward one of the ornate chest tombs. This one had a flat top, and Celeste noticed 2 other ghosts sitting around it as if it was a table. They held something in their hands. Cards. Her brows mashed together as she squinted at them. Are they playing poker? "Yup. We got our regular poker game going, so I don't have much time. But you girls better take good care of that special item. I tried to keep it safe when I was alive." "Oh, right. And just what is this special item?" The ghost looked at her slyly out of the corner of his eye. "Oh, come on. I know. You girls know about it. Otherwise, why would you be looking?" "We need to keep the relic away from the bad guys." "Yes, of course, that's no secret. You'll know it when you see it, and know what to do with it." "Yes, but what exactly is it?" "Why, it was one of my prized possessions. You do know who I am, don't you?" Celeste shook her head. "Well, I might have been a bit before your time. I'm Ezra Finch, one of the very first pharmacists here in the state of Maine." The ghost puffed up in a swell of pride. "People came from all over the country to get my medicines." He leaned in
I'll be
close
back,
to
guys.
Celeste
Enjoy the
and winked.
book.
"Some say they were magical."
Actually,
"Magical?"
I can't do that. I haven't listened to this book yet, so I can't do that, can I? I'll be back. I have to grab a charger for my MacBook. Okay, I'm back, guys. Let me plug this in, and then we can continue our book. So far what has happened, if you just so happen to skip through the book, like a psychopath, basically, the girls are at the Finch's farm, and they're trying to look for a clue in the graveyard, aka a grave mistake. Don't mind the cord. Anyway, let's get back to the book.
Celeste's brows shot up. Ezra laughed. "Sure. You know what I mean?"
No.
"Sort of," Celeste said. "So, where can we find this relic?" Ezra's thin, ghostly lips pressed together. "Well, I can't say where it is now. I don't leave the graveyard here, and I know there's been some changes since my time. But be that as it may, I provided a clue before I left this world." "Okay." Celeste was starting to feel impatient with the ghost's vague talk and wondered if senility ran in the family. "What's the clue?" "Why, it's in the center." Ezra pointed toward the middle of the graveyard. "The most important part of the graveyard, of course." Celeste glanced in that direction. All she saw was rows of gravestones. "Could you be more specific?" "Specific? You want me to spell it out?" Ezra glanced at his wrist. "I'd love to, but I don't have time. I gotta get to the poker game. The boys are waiting. Though I do wish we had a 4th. Anyway, you girls should be smart enough to figure it out, and if you can't, then maybe you aren't the ones it should be entrusted to." And with that, he turned and walked off toward the now empty chest tomb poker table, his ghost fading with each passing step. When he was almost invisible, he turned back and said, "Oh, I almost forgot. Don't make a grave mistake." Celeste could hear the echo of his laughter as he slowly faded into thin air. "What is it?" Jolene asked.
Another ghost.
The others respected Celeste's unusual gift of talking to ghosts and had learned that when it looked like she was talking to no one, it usually meant she was talking to the departed. They'd learned to be quiet and let her do her thing. "I'm not sure. I might have just talked to a senile ghost, but he seemed like he knew we were looking for a relic, and he pointed me this way." Celeste pointed her finger in the direction Ezra had indicated. Jolene and Celeste started in that direction, with Morgan and Fiona following. The center of the graveyard was easy to find. It had stones back to back in a square with a large black obelisk in the middle, about 15 feet from the trunk of a big old oak. "What are we supposed to be looking for?" Fiona asked. "That's the problem. My ghost friend was very vague." Celeste
Aren't they
bent
all?
down to inspect one of the gravestones. "Maybe it's one of these epitaphs." "They are fascinating," Jolene said from behind one of the old stones. "Like this one. We must all die, there is no doubt. Your glass is running, mine is out." "How about this one?" Fiona chimed in. "Thou lovely child, in parents' hope, in early years cut down, companion now of the ghastly group that lie beneath the ground." Morgan made a face. "Those are depressing. I don't see a clue in either of them. Do you guys?" They shook their heads. Then Morgan added, "Did your ghost give you anything more specific? I mean, we could be looking at these graves all day and not find a thing." Celeste shrugged. "He just said it was the most important part of the graveyard and not to make a grave mistake." "Don't make a grave mistake," Jolene repeated. "Thaddeus said that too. He said his great-grandfather used to say it." "That's who my ghost was, I think." Celeste looked down at the gravestone of Ezra Finch. He would have been just old enough to be Thaddeus's great-grandfather. The others came to stand beside her. "Looks like he's got a snappy saying on his, too," Fiona said. "When two become one, the healing's begun. In my favorite place under the sun." She moved closer to the stone, squinting at the bottom. "This line is harder to read. Look to the west, I can finally rest." "That makes sense. He would talk about healing," Celeste said. "He was quite proud. He was one of the early Maine pharmacists and said people came from all over for his medicines, as they had powerful healing properties." "Like Morgan," Fiona pointed out. "Yeah, maybe he had paranormal powers too," Morgan said. "That would explain why he had the relic. But I don't see how this gravestone could give us a clue," Fiona replied. "Wait a minute," Jolene said. "I don't think it does. You said he said it was in the center, right?" Celeste nodded. "And then he said, 'Don't make a grave mistake,' right?" "Yes." Celeste drew out the word. "Well, don't you guys see?" Jolene flapped her arms. "It's not on the graves. It's on this obelisk, which is probably in the exact center. Looking at the graves is a mistake." Celeste felt a spark of hope. "Yes, that makes perfect sense." The obelisk was 1 foot wide and 4 feet tall. It was made of smooth black marble. The 3 sides were flat, like a long, thin triangle. It was topped with a round ball. Too bad Celeste didn't see any clue on it. The 4 girls circled the object a couple of times. "Okay, I don't see any clue," Fiona said finally. Well, it's not going to be obvious. Jolene's voice rose in exasperation. If it was too obvious, it would be too easy for anyone to find the relic. We have to use our brains. Jolene bent down to brush dirt away from the bottom of the obelisk, and Fiona rolled her eyes. It's always something cryptic, Fiona muttered as she bent closer to the sides of the obelisk, which were polished smooth on the edges, but had a rougher pattern engraved down the middle. The pattern reminded Celeste of a Celtic knot, but not exactly. As she stared at it, she realized it looked familiar. Hey, I think I've seen this pattern before. She ran her hand along the pattern, feeling the bumps of the carving with her fingertips. Fiona came around to stand beside her. Hey, you're right. I think this same pattern is on the Oblate Museum building. Don't you think, Morgan? But Morgan wasn't paying attention. She stood in a rigid line, looking toward the woods across the field, like a Springer Spaniel sighting a bird. Celeste looked over in time to see the sun glint off a glass surface. Someone was watching them with binoculars. Stop! Right there! Jolene barked as the four sisters took off running in the direction of the intruder.
Oh, fun.
But the intruder didn't stop, which pretty much ruled out Thaddeus's nephews. Surely they wouldn't be running away from intruders on their own land. Morgan ran as fast as she could. Beside her, she could see Fiona trying to keep up, her fist clutched around the pebbles. Up ahead, the figure weaved its way west, toward the road. He had a good head start, and he was fast. Morgan willed her legs to go faster as she tried to gain on the person. It was a man, she thought, but she couldn't get a good look while concentrating on running and trying not to whack into any of the trees. He looked to be average height and was wearing a thick hooded sweatshirt, so she couldn't see his hair. It would be all but impossible to recognize him later. The man was getting close to the edge of the woods, and Morgan figured he probably had a car parked on the road. They'd need to catch up pretty quick if they wanted to stop him. He's getting away. There's no way we can catch him before he gets to the road, Celeste huffed between breaths. Maybe I can slow him down, Fiona yelled. Out of the corner of her eye, Morgan watched Fiona pull her arm back, then fling it forward, releasing the stones she'd been holding. Morgan held her breath as the stones bounced ineffectively off the trees. No magic there. Fiona's face crumbled in disappointment, and Morgan's heart pinched for her. Jolene took a cue from Fiona and thrust out her palms. A stream of purple energy shot out, but too many trees were in the way. The energy hit a pine tree, splitting it in half. The two halves fell away from each other and landed with a thud. Morgan jumped over one of the halves and continued forward. A few seconds later, the girls burst out onto the road, just in time to hear a car squealing around the corner. They'd lost him. Damn it! Jolene stood in the road, staring in the direction of the car. Celeste bent over at the waist to catch her breath and puffed. Who was that? Jolene turned
Not
back
Mateo.
to face her sisters.
You wouldn't run
Someone
away from them, that's
following
for sure.
us. Or watching us, Fiona said. Well, I know one thing, Jolene added. Whoever it was, wasn't a paranormal. How do you know that? Fiona gasped as she held onto her right side. Because if they were, they would have just used their paranormal powers to fight us, or escape instead of running. Celeste straightened. Maybe they weren't supposed to capture, just observe us. You mean let us do the detecting work, and then swoop in at the end and take the relic? Jolene nodded. That sounds like something Bly would have his men do. That's for sure. Morgan blew out a breath and kicked at a stone on the ground. Looking down, she noticed something that sent a jolt of recognition to her brain. She bent closer and nudged at the object with her toe. Her heart froze as she watched it roll off the pavement into the sand on the side of the road. It was a black crow licorice, just like the one she'd seen next to the dead body. Chapter 5. Jolene wrapped her fingers around the mug of steaming hot chocolate and leaned toward her sister Morgan, who sat opposite her in the oversized chair in the east sitting room of their home. So, you think whoever was watching us was the same person that killed the guy with the map? She asked Morgan. Morgan nodded. They're definitely linked somehow. I can feel it. And how many people eat those licorices anyway? It's too much of a coincidence. Jolene glanced out the large bay window, with its panoramic view of the Atlantic Ocean below the cliff, only a couple of 100 feet from the home. It made sense, except for one thing. The guy they had seen hadn't used any paranormal powers. But maybe he wasn't trying to capture them or hurt them. Just because he didn't use the powers didn't mean he didn't have them. One thing was for sure. Whoever killed the guy with the map was after the relic, and now it looked like he was after them, too. But who was the killer? One of Bly's men? A rogue paranormal? Or someone else altogether? All they had to go on was a piece of candy and a dead body. Is there any word on who the dead guy was? Jolene settled back on the couch and looked up at Luke Hunter, Morgan's boyfriend. Maybe if we can figure out who he was, we can get a bead on who was following us. I'm one step ahead of you on that. I asked Brody, and he said his name was Hale Swain. Fiona tapped her fingernail on her pursed lips. Hale Swain. That name sounds kind of familiar. Are you thinking of Gunnar Swain, the archaeologist? Celeste asked. I've heard Cal mention him a few times. Maybe. Do you think they are related? Fiona asked. Celeste shrugged. Who knows? But what's an archaeologist got to do with any of this? Good question. And Swain isn't exactly a unique name. It may not be related, but maybe we should check into this archaeologist guy. Morgan turned to Luke. Did Brody say if the police have any leads or any idea why this guy was in town? Luke shook his head. Not really. They think he was killed with some kind of newfangled taser in a bar fight. Jolene snorted. I guess they would. They don't know about paranormals. Luke knew about them, though. He knew all about the Blackmore sisters' abilities. In fact, that's why he'd come back to town in the first place after spending 2 decades in military service. He hadn't known it at the time, but his new job with a secret government agency was designed to keep him close to the Blackmore sisters. A happy side effect of that was that he'd reconnected with his former high school sweetheart, Morgan. The girls had learned that keeping their gifts a secret was wise, so they didn't tell many people about them. That included Luke's brother, Brody Hunter, who happened to be a member of the Noquit police force. They figured what he didn't know couldn't hurt him. Fiona leaned forward on the couch, her red curls sliding across her arm as she put her cup of tea down on the coffee table. Do you think whoever was following us could have figured out the clue on the obelisk? Morgan shook her head. I doubt it. They weren't in hearing range. All they would have known was that we were looking at the obelisk as well as the gravestones. Celeste's brow creased. What I don't understand is, if he was following us, then how did he end up at the nursing home before us? And the aide implied there was more than one person. Maybe that really was his nephews at the nursing home. Jolene turned to look at her mother, and she felt a flood of warmth. For years, she'd resigned herself to the fact that she'd never see her mother again. And now, here she was, sitting across from her, looking happy and on the way to good health. Do you know if Finch had any nephews? The room they were in had been her mother's favorite, and they had continued to use it even after they thought she was dead. But for Jolene, using the room had been bittersweet. Her mother's touch was evident throughout the decor, from the soft blue and gray colors to the giant starfish and shells to the chippy white painted furniture. On the one hand, the room had made her feel closer to her mother, but the constant reminder that Joanna was gone had always made her heart ache. Seeing Joanna sitting in this very room with Belladonna curled up and purring in her lap was something Jolene never thought would happen, and the sight of it still made her heart sing. Joanna shook her head, her long silvery hair swinging like silk. No, he was the last of the Finch family line. Speaking of the Finches, I talked to Ezra Finch, well, Ezra's ghost, and he seemed to know we were looking for a relic, Celeste said. Joanna pressed her lips together. Ezra, he was before my time. Your grandma would remember, but I think he was famous for something. Celeste nodded. He said he was a pharmacist, and his pills had almost magical healing powers. I think he might have been a paranormal. Well, that makes sense. That's why he would have a relic. Luke twisted up the side of his mouth. What exactly is the relic, anyway? Jolene sighed. Oh, that's one of the problems. We have no idea. Gonna make it kind of hard to find, isn't it? Yeah. We don't have too many leads except the obelisk in the graveyard. And you think that's a clue to the Oblate Museum because the pattern on the side matches? Luke asked. Yep. I looked them both up on the internet, Jolene said, then in a lower voice added, even though I didn't have to. But that doesn't make sense. The Oblate Museum has only been around for 5 years. There's no way Ezra Finch could have put a relic there, because he was already dead, Luke pointed out. The museum has only been open for 5 years, but the building has been there since the early 1800s. It was there when Ezra was around. Back then it was a Grange Hall. Joanna petted Belladonna's silky fur, and the cat let out a little meow, as if in agreement with what she'd just said. But if Ezra hid a relic in there 90 years ago, wouldn't someone have found it by now? Morgan asked. Jolene shrugged. Maybe. But maybe he hid it really well. We don't have any other leads, so we have to follow this hope. Well, then, I guess I know where we'll be going this afternoon, Morgan said. Yep, we'll be making a visit to the Oblate Museum. Chapter 6. It was Jolene's turn to drive, so they all piled into the Trailblazer and made their way to the Oblate Museum across town. Fiona sat in back, her stomach swooping as she noticed the blue flashing lights parked in front of the old building. Celeste peered out the window as they pulled to a stop. What's going on? I don't know, but we better find out. Jolene jammed the car into park, and they piled out, running up the steps and right into Brody Hunter. Whoa! Brody held his hands up in front of him, stopping them at the top of the steps. Where are you guys going? Jolene craned her neck to see around him. What's happening in the museum? Brody's eyes narrowed. It was robbed. The sisters exchanged a look. Robbed? What did they take? Brody looked at them sideways. Why do you ask? He turned to Morgan. And is it a coincidence I keep running into you at crime scenes? Yes, Morgan said dryly, then added, Is the museum terribly damaged? Can we go inside? I'd like to talk to the staff. If you weren't practically married to my brother, I'd be suspicious. But as it is, I'll let you go inside. The area is cleared, and they want to open for business anyway. Thanks. Morgan pinched his cheek, and Fiona saw him turn pink before shaking his head and walking away. This can't be
Practically
a coincidence,
married.
Jolene said, as Morgan opened the glass doors for them to enter the foyer of the museum. The large foyer had an oversized oak desk at one end. Bernadette Mayhew stood in front of the desk in a light brown cardigan and pink and brown plaid skirt. The 4-foot-tall senior citizen had to be 90 if she was a day, but she was feisty as all get out. Fiona didn't know who to feel more sorry for, Bernadette or the thieves that might have tangled with her.
Oh.
What happened? Celeste asked. Bernadette pressed her lips together and said in a startlingly loud and clear voice, "Vandals, that's what happened. They broke right in at the noon lunch break and messed up the displays. Hooligans, that's what they are." In broad daylight? Was anyone hurt? Fiona asked. No. We run on a skeleton staff in the off-season. I was the only one here today, and I closed up for my noon break. I had to go pick up some new orthopedic shoes. When I came back, the door was open, and it was a mess out back. Bernadette waved her hand toward the back of the museum. Can we see? Morgan ventured. Sure, I'll show you. Thankfully, they only messed with one display. Bernadette turned and started toward the back. She looked over her shoulder at the girls.
Wait.
I must have scared them off when I came back.
Haha.
Did you see them? Jolene asked. Not really. I think they ran out the back when I came in the front. I thought I heard the door back here bang shut. The museum was just 2 rooms. The old Grange Hall had been divided into the front foyer with a tall divider wall and openings on either side leading to the large back room, which was sectioned off into the various museum displays. Along the back wall were bathrooms and a small kitchen, which looked to Fiona like it could be the original from the Grange days. The building still had the original wide pine plank flooring that groaned as they walked, adding an eerie feeling to the quiet building. Bernadette stopped in front of a display with smashed glass and empty spaces where the stolen items must have been. Is this the only display that was messed with? Morgan turned to look around the museum, the rest of which seemed to be in place. Bernadette nodded her gray head vigorously. Yes, they took old apothecary jars and mortars and pestles. She leaned toward them and lowered her voice. Probably for one of those mess labs. Mess lab? Celeste asked. I think she means meth lab, Jolene said. Yeah, whatever. You know how young kids are these days. Bernadette looked at Jolene and flushed. Sorry, I didn't mean you, Jolene. Anyway, these items were priceless from the early days of Maine. We had one of the very first pharmacists here, Ezra Finch. His family donated the things in this display. Fiona looked at Bernadette. Did you say Ezra Finch? Bernadette's face lit up at a chance to talk about no-quit history. Why, yes. He was an herbalist, just like Morgan, and one of the first to produce medicine using chemicals. Of course, that was before they even had pharmacists, but that's what the discipline evolved to. Back then, pharmacists made their medicines in an apothecary, and Ezra had one right on the Finch farm. It was the only one in Maine, and people came from all over to get his medicine. Fiona's brows knit together. I didn't see an apothecary on the Finch farm. It burned down many years ago. Bernadette shook her head. Anyway, I must have scared the vandals off before they could loot any of the other displays. Well, it's a good thing you weren't hurt, Morgan said. I admit It was a bit disturbing, but it takes a lot more than some young yahoos to hurt an old bat like me. Bernadette cocked her ear toward the foyer. I think I hear more visitors. I best go greet them and explain about the mess. But you girls, take as long as you want to look at the displays. Fiona watched her bustle off, then turned back to look at the damaged display, her stomach sinking. So, it looks like they got to the relic before us.
What if that wasn't it?
I don't think so, Morgan said. What do you mean? This stuff was from Ezra Finch and something is missing. The relic is obviously one of the things they took. No, that doesn't make sense. Ezra hid the relic, so how could it be in the museum? He was already dead when they turned the Grange Hall into a museum. The relic was probably in the stuff his family donated, Celeste offered. Morgan twisted her lips. Maybe, but my gut tells me otherwise. Plus, Ezra told Celeste he'd hidden it. Well, I know enough by now to trust your gut feelings. Fiona looked around the room. So, if the relic wasn't in the display, where did he put it? It would have to be somewhere in the building that a lot of people didn't know about. A secret hiding place, Celeste said. Probably not on the main floor. Morgan lowered her voice so the new visitors who had wandered into the room couldn't hear her. I wonder if we can slip into the basement or attic to search. Celeste leaned back to look out into the lobby. That could get tricky. We might have to come up with some sort of story for Bernadette. Maybe we won't have to. Jolene looked up from her smartphone where she'd been typing. I think that if whoever broke in was looking for the relic, they got confused about the clues. The pattern on the obelisk matches the pattern on the cement on the corners of this building, right? Right. That's why we're in the building, Fiona said. Because Ezra hid the relic in here. Or at least that's what he implied. Not in here, Jolene said. Outside. Outside? Celeste looked incredulous. I'm sure someone would have noticed it just sitting around outside by now. Not if it were hidden in a secret compartment inside a cornerstone. Jolene held the phone out for them to look at the screen. Cornerstones are common in buildings, and some of them have been used as time capsules. This building was built in Ezra's day. Maybe he had something to do with the construction and made a secret compartment. The screen showed the corner of a building with small concrete slabs like those on the Oblate Museum. One of the slabs was slid open, revealing a small compartment inside. This building has similar construction. It could have one of these. Morgan was already halfway to the door. Let's check it out. The concrete and brick construction was unusual for an old New England Grange Hall, which were typically built from wood. Fiona couldn't help but wonder if maybe Ezra did have something to do with its construction and chose the materials and style on purpose so he could have a place to stash the relic. I think it would be one of the bottom corners, Jolene said, as they walked slowly around the building. She bent down to touch one of them, pressing and pulling. The piece didn't budge. I'm not sure if one can just open them by pressing. It seems like that would be too easy. Right, but what other options do we have? Let's check out all four corners and see if Morgan gets a vibe, Celeste said. No pressure there. Morgan rolled her eyes, and the others laughed. But she continued around the building to the back and focused her attention on the corners of the building. The back was a small alley-like area with another building behind it, which was good because no one could see what they were doing. If they were about to retrieve an important paranormal relic, Fiona figured it was probably better if there were no witnesses. She scooped up a few stones anyway, just in case. Not that her shotgun stones trick was working, but she figured it couldn't hurt. Morgan homed in on the east corner. She bent down and touched the cornerstone with the tips of her fingers. She pressed, then pulled, then pried, but the stone did not budge. She looked up at the others. I think this might be it, but it seems to be stuck or sealed.
It's old.
Jolene squinted at the stone, then fished in her pocketbook, coming up with a pocket knife. She squatted beside Morgan and started prying at the corner of the stone. Fiona heard the sound of concrete scraping on concrete. It's coming. It just takes a little wiggling. Jolene pried at the edge of the stone, and it slid back, revealing a dark, black hole. Holy heck. Celeste turned to Jolene. You were right. Yeah. Now let's see what's in there. All four girls bent down to peer into the black hole. Fiona couldn't see a thing in there. The opening was about 6 inches wide by 4 inches tall, but since it was black inside, Fiona couldn't tell how far back it went. Jolene fiddled with her cell phone to activate the flashlight app, then aimed it into the hole. Fiona's stomach sank. It's empty.
Oh.
Wait a minute. Jolene stuck her arm inside, up to the elbow, twisting this way and that to feel all around the inside. Her eyes narrowed and her face scrunched. There's something, but I can't quite grab it. Got it. A look of triumph spread across Jolene's face as she slowly pulled her arm out, revealing her clenched fist. The girls huddled around in a circle, watching as Jolene unclenched her fist to reveal a black crow licorice. What the heck? Morgan said as they stared at the round confection.
Whoa.
Fiona was so focused on the candy in Jolene's hand that she hadn't paid attention to her surroundings. A scraping sound behind her caught her attention, and she whirled around to see 3 large, bearded men.
No.
Well, well. What have you got there?
Nothing.
The largest gestured toward Jolene's hand, which she quickly closed. Don't bother hiding it from me, because you're going to hand it to me right now, or we'll kill you on the spot.
What the?
Chapter 7.
What the fudge?
Fiona's heart froze. The 3 men were a lot bigger than her and her sisters. The largest one, the one who had spoken, sneered at them. To his left, a man with a red beard stood in a fighting stance, mirrored by another man with a black beard on his right. Okay, here you go. Jolene's fingers flew open, and she thrust her hand out at Redbeard. A stream of black goo, ringed in glowing orange, poured out of her hand like molten lava and hit Redbeard in the face. Redbeard screamed. His hands flew up and he staggered backward just as Blackbeard pulled a weird-looking rock out of his pocket and aimed it at Jolene.
Geode!
Joe, look out!
Not a geode!
Morgan tried to jump in between the rock and Jolene. The momentum caused her to crash into Blackbeard. They tumbled to the ground, and the rock smashed into a million pieces.
Yes! Thank God!
Each of the pieces
I already know what it was.
glowed
It was a
bright
geode.
white, giving the appearance of a string of Christmas lights piled on the ground. Their glow winked out, and the rocks disappeared.
Yes!
Blackbeard threw Morgan off, and she stumbled backward, her shoulders slumping as she fell to the ground.
Holy shit.
What the heck was that? Fiona didn't have time to finish her sentence. Largebeard threw a glowing white rope toward her, and she had to duck out of the way to keep from getting hit. She watched in horror as the rope hit the ground. Sparks flew in the air, and she hopped around to avoid them. Beside her, Jolene hopped around too. Her wounded hand was cradled against her chest,
and Jake?
her face contorted in pain. Morgan was coming
Where's the
awake in the
boys?
corner, but still looked dazed.
Oh my goodness, this is insane.
Out of the corner of her eye, Fiona saw Celeste gearing up for one of her karate moves.
Oh.
She shot her leg up, her heel connecting with Blackbeard's jaw.
Oh,
Were they winning or losing?
we don't know.
Fiona had no idea. She could see that Redbeard was out of commission with the black goo, Blackbeard was busy fighting off Celeste, but Morgan was slumped in a stupor, and Largebeard was advancing on her and Jolene.
No. Wait, it's 2 against 1.
Fiona's heart pounded in her chest. Since Jolene was still holding her hand in pain, it was up to her to fight off Largebeard.
No.
She tightened her fist against the rocks she'd picked up earlier and focused her energy on them with all her might. She thought back to what her father had always told her when she was a little girl. If you wanted something bad enough, you could make it happen if you believed. But did she believe? As a child, it seemed so simple. But now, as an adult, sometimes she felt like all that magical belief had disappeared. She didn't have much of a choice right now, though, so she flung the rocks at Largebeard and jumped back. Fiona felt a glimmer of triumph as an ember of red glow surrounded the rocks. They hit Largebeard in the chest, bounced off, and fell to the ground, leaving small burn marks in his blue nylon jacket. Too bad it wasn't enough to stop him. He merely looked down at the rocks, then back at Fiona.
Oh my God.
Is that all you got? He laughed as he lunged toward her, the rope in his hands. She backed up until the cold bricks of the wall stopped her. He raised the rope as if to slip it around her neck.
Where are you?
She squeezed her eyes shut.
Oh my God.
Leave her alone, Jolene yelled. Fiona opened her eyes in time to see a purple ball of energy sear Largebeard's forehead. He staggered backward, bumping into Blackbeard, who had just been kicked in the jaw by Celeste for the second time.
Oh, yeah.
Jolene didn't wait for them to recover. She thrust her fingers out, pummeling all 3 men with tiny energy balls. Retreat! Largebeard yelled. The other 2 didn't need any encouragement. They had already turned and were running back down the alley. Celeste rushed to Morgan, helping her up. Are you okay? Jolene asked Fiona. Yes, Fiona answered. She was fine physically, but mentally she felt like crap. Her stupid rocks hadn't worked, and she hadn't been able to do anything to defend herself or her sisters. Instead, she'd had to depend on Jolene, who was already injured. The other sisters all had defensive skills. Fiona felt like a boat anchor. Are you okay? She asked, indicating Jolene's hand. I'm fine. Jolene held her hand up. It's just a little burn from the melted licorice. You can fix that up right away with one of your carnelian healing stones. That cheered Fiona up. Maybe she couldn't help fight off bad guys, but in the past, her carnelian stones had been able to speed up healing dramatically. At least she could help out with the aftermath of a paranormal encounter. You guys okay? Jolene and Fiona walked over to join Celeste, who was helping Morgan get steady on her feet. Yeah, what was that thing? Morgan asked. It felt like it drained all the energy out of me.
Geode.
I think that's one of those geodes that Bly used on me before. Jolene glanced down at the ground to make sure all the pieces were gone. That's exactly what it does. I'm glad he didn't get a chance to use it on all of us, Celeste said. Who knows what might have happened if we were all incapacitated? Yeah, Jolene frowned. I guess they wanted something that was in that cornerstone, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't the licorice. Good point. What were they after? Celeste asked. My guess is they were after the relic, Morgan answered, which they thought was in the cornerstone. Fiona's brow creased. But the cornerstone was empty. Right, Morgan said, which brings up the question, if the attackers were Bly's guys and they didn't know the cornerstone was empty, then who took the relic? Chapter 8. It's simple. Jolene slipped a K-cup into the coffee machine, then turned and leaned her backside against the counter. The licorice killer must have taken the relic. Morgan pressed her lips together. But why would he leave a licorice in the cornerstone? Celeste backed out of the fridge with an armful of leafy greens and headed toward the juicer. Maybe he was taunting us. You. Belladonna appeared in the doorway to the butler's pantry and rubbed the side of her face against the corner of the door jamb before snaking her paw under the cabinet and batting a small object across the kitchen floor. But if the licorice killer took the relic, then who broke into the museum? Joanna asked, her eyes tracking the object as it skittered in front of her, then disappeared under the lip of the cabinet near the sink. Maybe there are two different parties looking for the relic, Morgan suggested. One group broke into the museum, and the other, the licorice killer, got into the cornerstone. That would make sense. Celeste pulled spinach out of a bag and piled it into a bowl already loaded with wheatgrass and kale. Maybe the bearded guys were the ones that broke in. They realized the relic wasn't among any of the items they stole, but they found a clue to look in the cornerstone and came back only to discover us looking in there first. That's an interesting theory. Morgan tapped a fingernail against her coffee mug. But don't you guys think it's strange that they took several items? I mean, why not just take one item, the relic? Jolene took her full coffee mug to the island and slid into one of the stools. It's obvious. They don't know what the relic is, so they took everything they thought might be the relic. Joanna nodded. That could very well be. After all, we don't know what it is either. Wow! Belladonna scooted across the room and swiped her paw under the cabinet near the sink, extracting the object and batting it over toward the back door like a hockey player testing out his slap shot. Jolene watched the object shoot past her, a smile corking her lips. Belladonna frequently amused herself by batting and chasing little items like plastic milk bottle caps and elastic bands, and she was a lot of fun to watch. But Jolene was only momentarily distracted by the cat's antics. She brought her attention back to the problem at hand, pressing her lips together as she considered their conversation. If what you guys are saying is true, then the licorice killer and the Beards are racing against each other and us for the relic. Right, but we don't know if the licorice killer is one of Bly's guys or if he killed one of Bly's guys, Fiona said. This licorice killer person scares me. He must be very powerful to take out one of Bly's minions. Celeste loaded some greens into the tunnel of the juicer and switched it on. The noise made it impossible to talk, so Jolene thought about the facts of the case while the machine made its headache-inducing noise.
Fair.
So far, all they really knew was that Ezra Finch had hidden an important relic decades ago. That relic was infused with energy from an energy master, which could be disastrous if...
Hold up. So, if there was this relic, then... Licorice. Licorice. But what Mateo just tell them? Guys, it's just a theory, okay? But what if the licorice killer is Mateo? I mean, he has paranormal powers, obviously. Otherwise, he wouldn't be in the paranormal community from the last book. But we don't know his paranormal gifts, so what if he has a similar power to Jolene. Sorry, she's like my favorite, and like the way the sisters describe their relationship is like, oh snap, and it makes my book that I'm writing, a fanfiction, so much better. Okay, so yeah, yeah. um. So yeah, that's just my theory. Okay, let's keep listening.
That fell into the wrong hands. One or more groups of paranormal bad guys were after the relic, one of whom had a penchant for black crow licorices and had already killed at least one person. They had no idea what the relic was or where to look next. Mercifully, the whirring of the juicer stopped, and Jolene watched Celeste pour the green, gloppy liquid into a glass. So, it looks like we're up against both the licorice killer and Bly's guys. But who has the relic? The licorice killer must have it, since it was no longer in the cornerstone, Morgan said. Joanna's left brow rose a fraction of an inch. If it was in there in the first place, Fiona nodded. That's right. We only know that the licorice killer was in there before us. We don't know he actually found anything. And if the bearded attackers reported back that we were in the cornerstone, then Bly probably thinks we have it, and he'll be coming after us, Celeste said over the rim of her juice glass. Meow! Belladonna's paw shot out
quit
at
scaring
lightning
me.
speed, sending the object zipping across the floor. Jolene frowned as she watched it. It didn't look like a milk carton ring or any of Belladonna's usual toys. She stuck her foot out to intercept it. The object bounced off her foot, then spun to a stop an inch away. It was an old brown cork. She slid off her stool and grabbed it off the floor, then stood, holding it up in front of her face. What is this? I'm not sure Belladonna should be playing with it. Wow. Belladonna glared at Jolene, as if to say that she was perfectly capable of figuring out what was safe to play with on her own. Morgan squinted at the cork. That looks like one of my remedy bottle corks. She held her hand out, and Jolene dropped the cork into her palm. Yep, it's okay. My remedies are all natural. Jolene narrowed her eyes. But don't you use antique bottles? What if the cork still has some old poison on it? Morgan closed the cork in her fist and put her hands on her hips. I sanitize the bottles and the corks, of course. You don't think I'd be giving remedies to people in bottles with poisonous corks, do you? But anyway, I have no idea how she got this. I don't leave my stuff lying around. I just thought she was batting around some balled-up masking tape. Me too. Jolene felt bad that she'd thought the cork might not be sanitized. She knew Morgan was diligent about safety with her remedies. Still, it unnerved her that the cat was batting around the cork, and she hadn't noticed what it was, which made her wonder what other items the cat played with that she assumed was one thing when it was really something else. Assumptions were too easy to make, and Jolene knew from her private investigator training that assuming was never a good idea. And that thought made her wonder if they were making too many assumptions about the relic and the parties involved. I'm not sure what to think about this. We can't assume anything about Bly and the licorice killer, or even that they are the only two groups after the relic, Celeste said. Sheesh, how many people do you think are looking for the darn thing?
So many.
The amount of people looking for the relic isn't what worries me the most, Morgan said. What worries me most is who has it now. Nobody has it. A voice shot in from the hallway, seconds before its owner.
Luke Mateo?
A tall, sharply dressed woman appeared in the doorway.
Dorian Hall.
Jolene recognized the woman as Dorian Hall, Luke's mysterious boss. Dorian was decked out in her usual all-black office attire outfit. Her short black hair was salted with a few grays, but her dark eyes were sharp and clear.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get in here? Morgan leaned back in her
Not
chair
hard,
to look
girls.
down the
You need
hall
to lock
toward the
your
front
door.
door. Dorian looked back over her shoulder. Luke said you girls always leave the door open. I knocked, but no one answered, so I just walked in. Jolene frowned at her. Luke was always on them about the security at the house, and with good reason. Jolene wasn't sure she wanted everyone walking right in, not even Dorian. Belladonna must have felt the same way, because she arched her back and hissed at the tall woman, then slinked her way out of the room, giving Dorian a wide berth as she passed her in the doorway. What's with her? Dorian watched the cat sidestep down the hallway. Maybe she doesn't like people walking in, Fiona said. And how do you know no one has the relic? We have our ways. Dorian crossed her arms on her chest and leaned her shoulder on the doorframe. Anyway, we have word there is more than one group after the relic, but no one has it in their possession. Yet. Just what is it? Celeste asked. That I can't tell you. Morgan narrowed her
What
eyes
do you
at
mean
Dorian.
you can't tell them?
Really? You seem to know everything else. Dorian pushed off the doorframe and stepped over to the kitchen island. Leaning her palms on the surface, she bent forward slightly and fixed the girls with an earnest look. Our outfit can only recover so much information. We have limited resources. That's why we need you girls to step it up and get the relic before Bly does. So, you're hiring us? Joanna looked shrewdly at Dorian. Dorian's company, which the girls knew was really a secret branch of the government, despite her denials, had hired them to do a couple of other jobs, and they paid well. Of course, the Blackmores didn't really need money, not since they'd discovered a priceless hoard of treasure hidden by their ancestor, Isaiah Blackmore. But since Joanna's return, she'd been running their activities like a finely honed business, and she didn't think it was wise to turn down money. Jolene agreed with her philosophy. You never knew when earnings might dry up. Yes, I already have Luke out trying to identify the other groups looking for the relic. Dorian surveyed the room. Have you girls had any interaction with any other paranormal groups?
Being honest.
The sisters looked at each other. The girls had learned that the less information they gave out, the better. Jolene knew each of them was wondering if they should tell Dorian. But now that they were working for her, Jolene figured they should probably come clean. After all, they were on the same side, and Dorian might have information or resources that could help them. Joanna must have thought the same thing. She looked at Dorian out of the corner of her eye. As a matter of fact, we have. My girls have already been followed and attacked, so we can't accept your usual rate. This job is much more dangerous. Already attacked? You're already looking into it, then? I figured you would be. A smug smile spread across Dorian's face. And you were doing that for free. Joanna shrugged. That's right. So, you owe us. I figure a 10% increase should cover it. Dorian frowned. I don't know if my bosses will agree to that. Joanna's left brow ticked up. Well, then maybe we'll recover the relic and use it for ourselves instead of handing it over to you. Dorian held her palms up. Okay, 10%, but not a penny more. And the next job goes back to the regular rate. Joanna stared at Dorian for a few seconds, then stuck out her hand. Okay, deal. The two women shook hands. Then Dorian said, Tell me about the attack. The girls related the events of the day, including the person following them at the Finch farm and the attack behind the museum. Dorian's face turned thoughtful as she tapped a red-tipped fingernail on her pursed lips. So, there is more than one party. Yes, but who is the other party? Morgan asked. I'm not sure, but I did hear that your old friend Overton has made some friends who possess very interesting paranormal gifts.
No.
Sheriff Overton? Morgan's eyes widened. Sheriff Overton had been a thorn in the girl's side since Joanna disappeared. He'd originally come to town to investigate her supposed death and ended up harassing the girls any chance he got. What they'd never realized was that he was one of the bad guys. Overton had left town mysteriously 2 years earlier, but the girls had been unfortunate enough to have a recent run-in with him where they'd been forced to barter a meteorite locket that enhanced paranormal abilities for their freedom. If Overton had paranormal associates that were using the locket, there was no telling what he might be up to. Do you think he's after the relic? Fiona asked. Dorian shrugged. It's possible, although he seems to be more interested in money than old relics. But if he thinks it will put him in a position of power, then he might want it. Great. Now we have to watch out for him, too, Jolene muttered. True, but he's no match for us, Celeste said. I'd be more worried about his associate, Joanna said. We don't know for sure that Overton is the other person after the relic. Morgan turned to Dorian. Any idea who else would be after it? I don't know, a rogue paranormal, perhaps? Dorian suggested. Do you have anyone in your rogues gallery that has a fetish for Black Crow licorice? Jolene asked. Excuse me? We found Black Crow licorice near the body and in the cornerstone, and on the road where the person that was following us had been parked. Interesting. Dorian shook her head. But I don't know of any paranormal that likes licorice. Maybe they are from a new faction we have yet to identify. That's a big help. Jolene blurted the words out and was rewarded with a sharp scowl from Dorian. So, what do we do now? Celeste asked, ignoring the adversarial undercurrent between Jolene and Dorian. Dorian glanced at the slim watch on her wrist. That's up to you, girls. I gotta run. She headed out of the kitchen, her heels emitting a staccato clack on the black and white tile floor.
Oh.
Don't forget to send the first payment, Joanna yelled after her. Payment for what? Mateo appeared in the doorway, loaded up with grocery bags. Cripes, this place is like Grand Central Station. Jolene stared at Mateo. What are you doing back here again? I thought you left. Mateo slid the bags onto the counter next to the fridge. I'm just loading up for Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving? Fiona frowned. We don't usually do anything for Thanksgiving since Mom disappeared. Yeah, and now she's back, so you girls have a big reason to be thankful.
Yeah.
Mateo started unloading the bags onto the counter. Yeah, I guess you're right. Morgan smiled at Joanna, then got up to help Mateo put the groceries in the fridge. But where have you been? Mateo bent down, his head in the fridge, as he put potatoes into the vegetable crisper. His voice came out muffled. Out and about. We were attacked, you know, Jolene blurted out, then grimaced, thinking the statement sounded stupid and wondering why she'd even said it. Mateo backed out of the fridge and winked at her. You can take care of yourselves. I can see none of you are hurt. Jolene bristled. She wondered why it bothered her so much that Mateo hadn't been there to come to their rescue.
Aww.
The girls had fought off bad guys without him plenty of times, so why did his absence bother her now? Anyway, what was Dorian doing here? Mateo opened a kitchen cabinet.
Yes, finally! Like, ugh. Like, okay. Okay, so, guys. So, I have this giant prediction because it's happened with all the other guys, so why can't it happen with Mateo and Jolene? And also, they're the cutest together, so, like, okay. So, here's the thing about these two. They get along so good. And oh my god, Jolene loves having him around. You don't notice it because you're not paying attention. But I can tell. She's like, wait, come back, I want to thank you for this. Like, and then he just disappears. Since like the third book. That was like the first time he ever appeared whenever, during Skinner's death. And he would just mysteriously disappear. But anyway, let's get back to the book.
Frowned the contents, and then opened the one next to it. She hired us to look for the relic, Fiona said. Uh-huh. Mateo shoved a can of cream of mushroom soup in the cabinet. You guys should really clean these cabinets out. They're so cluttered. I don't know how you can find anything. Jolene rolled her eyes behind his back, and Celeste snickered. So, where have you been? Morgan asked. Did your absence have anything to do with the relic? Not really. I was on a recon mission to see what Bly was up to. He definitely has plans for the relic, so we'd better find it soon. It worries me that there are other groups involved. I can't help but feel something isn't as it seems. Morgan pressed her lips together.
Oh.
You know, I get the same feeling. So, I guess the cornerstone must have been empty, Celeste said. But all three of the groups were looking in there. So was the relic ever in there? Or did we all follow the wrong clue? Good question, Morgan said. So what do we do now? Fiona echoed Celeste's earlier question. Jolene puffed out her cheeks. I guess we need to keep looking for the relic. We need to revisit the clues. It would be a lot easier to find the darn thing if we knew what it was, Morgan said. Joanna nodded. Uh-huh, or who the players were. The break-in at the museum must be related somehow, and I'm pretty sure that boat I saw has something to do with this, Celeste said. Right. Fiona whipped out her cell and started texting. Where is Jake? He was supposed to look into that. I say we regroup tonight when Luke and Jake are here.
Oh.
We can map out a plan,
Sorry, I had
figure
to.
out what to do next, and then start fresh tomorrow, Morgan suggested. Yes, but bright and early. I'm sure Bly and the other bad guys are working well into the night to find the relic, Celeste said. Joanna's face turned grim. One thing's for sure. Whatever the relic is, you can bet Bly has an evil plan for it. Mateo pushed a can of fried onion rings into one of the cabinets, shut the door, and turned around to face them. I'm sure you're right about Bly. What worries me more is that the other guy might be planning something even worse.
Other guy.
Chapter 9.
Explain?
Jolene looked over the top of her laptop screen at her sisters and their boyfriends, who were settling in on the overstuffed couches and chairs in the east sitting room. Jolene was just starting to do some research on the mysterious boat Celeste had seen in the cove, when Joanna, who had insisted on cleaning up the dinner dishes on her own, finally wheeled herself in. Did Mateo leave? Celeste's brows mashed together over the rim of her teacup. Joanna nodded. Yes, he had to go off again, but he said he'd be back in a few days.
Aww.
That guy sure is mysterious. Jake's brows ticked up over his steely gray eyes.
Ew.
Yeah, are you really sure we can trust him? Cal Reed, Celeste's boyfriend and longtime friend of the family, asked. Cal had grown up in Noquit, and the Blackmore sisters had known him since they were little.
Mm-hmm.
He was almost like a brother to all of them, but he and Celeste had been particularly close. Best friends on a platonic level until the year before, when they'd become more than friends.
Yeah.
Jolene smiled at the thought. Cal was a great guy, and she'd always thought he and Celeste were perfect for each other. It was about time the two of them figured out what the whole family had known all along. Joanna shot Cal a look. Of course we can. If it wasn't for Mateo, we might not have made it out of Fury Rock alive. You know that, Joanna said, referring to the harrowing events earlier in the year at the secret underground laboratory of Dr. Mortimer Bly, an evil paranormal whose face to the world was that of a scientist searching for alternative energy. Cal tilted his head in submission. Yeah, that's true. He just seems kind of elusive. It's part of his charm. Joanna smiled and slid her eyes to Jolene. Jolene chose to ignore her mother and focus on the task at hand. Her fingers flew over the keyboard. She was usually pretty good at hacking into online databases. Computer forensics was her forte, and while she usually tried to do things within the law, there were times when she had to step over the line. Too bad the Perkins Cove Harbor didn't keep information online. All they had to go by was the boat registration number, which didn't seem to come up in any of the state databases. Did you find out anything about that boat? She asked Jake. Jake had hired Jolene earlier in the year to help with his private investigator business. His forte was getting information from people, and Jolene knew he'd spent most of the day talking to his various contacts at the Cove and around town. The two of them had complementary skill sets and worked great together, although Jolene thought Jake could be a little overprotective of her at times, kind of like
that
an
is true.
unwanted big brother. She was working on that, but she had to admit that sometimes it did feel kind of nice to have someone watching out for her, as long as it didn't cramp her style. Jake twisted his lips. I did find out something, but I don't think it helps us much. The boat is registered to a shell company. I can't track who the owner is. What's the name of it? Luke asked. Light of Day Ventures? Could that be a front for Bly? Luke reached over to help Joanna, who was trying to maneuver the chair so she could transfer herself onto one of the armchairs. Joanna pushed him away, her face serious with determination. I can do it myself. Jolene watched her mother with amusement. She'd only been 14 when her mother had disappeared, and she hadn't got to know her well as an adult. But now she realized the woman was a dynamo of determination and grit. Light of Day Ventures. Morgan narrowed her eyes thoughtfully as Joanna lifted herself out of the chair, her legs shaking slightly as she stepped sideways and plopped down in the armchair. It could be, Joanna said after she was settled. Sounds like something he might use. The word light could be a reference to energy. Well, we already know he has people here in town. I mean, assuming the bearded Neanderthals that attacked us are with Bly, Fiona said. Speaking of that attack, Luke's face turned serious.
Aww.
I think we'd better tighten up security here at the house.
Yeah, no
It's
kidding.
no secret that Bly knows you live here. And clearly, there's a battle going on for this relic, so he'll probably have his minions break in sooner or later. Jolene and Morgan rolled their eyes.
Yep.
They knew that tightening up security meant Luke would have men watching the house and probably tailing them. Even though they'd installed a high-tech security system at his insistence just months ago, Luke didn't skimp when it came to their safety.
Aww.
To the girls, it felt like a restriction on their freedom. None of them thought they needed Luke's protection, but they'd learned early on that it was a waste of time arguing with him. Do what you must, Morgan smiled at him affectionately, then turned to Fiona. But he has a point. We should make sure we are protected. How are you coming with those obsidian amulets? Fiona had made protective amulets for them out of a black stone called obsidian earlier in the year. Before they'd been forced to give the meteorite locket to Overton, Fiona had boosted the power of several obsidian stones with the locket and made amulets for each of them. The amulets had the power to deflect negative energy, but they'd been damaged in a fight with Bly's minions. Fiona had already drained the bad energy they'd absorbed by burying them in the earth for several weeks. She was in the middle of doing the rest of the repairs at Sticks and Stones, the shop that she and Morgan owned together. With all this excitement, I almost forgot about them, Fiona said. But I'm almost done. Maybe we can stop over and I can finish them after we visit Thaddeus. Let's plan on it, Morgan replied. Jolene shut the laptop. She hadn't found anything more on the boat than Jake had. So, all we really know is that one or more other parties are after the relic. It must be more than one because someone was killed. So there's got to be at least 2 other groups, Celeste said. Did you find out anything more about the victim? Joanna asked. Is he related to that archaeologist that Cal knows? I looked into that, Cal said. But Gunnar Swain is very private. He keeps his family life close to the vest, and there's nothing on his siblings. I don't really know him either. I just know of him. And what do you know of him? Joanna asked. Is there a reason he would be involved in looking for the relic? Cal pressed his lips together. I doubt it. As far as I know, he's not involved in any paranormal stuff. He's made a lot of really great finds, mostly Egyptian, Mayan, and Aztec. He's quite wealthy. I don't see why he would have anything to do with it, unless there is an important archaeological find related to it. Jolene raised a brow at her sisters. They were all thinking the same thing. There was an important find right below their house, except Swain couldn't have known that. No one except them knew. Let's set that aside for now and talk about the groups that we do know are involved, Luke said. Jolene nodded. Good idea. There must be at least 2 groups, and one of them broke into the museum, so they must have thought it was a clue, just like we did. The break-in could have been a coincidence, Fiona said. Kids or vandals, like Bernadette said. Morgan scrunched up her face. No way. That would be too much of a coincidence. Besides, kids don't steal old apothecary jars. That stuff has no value. Right, Jake agreed. I don't know of any meth lab that uses old chemistry equipment, despite Bernadette's theory. But why would whoever was looking for the relic take them? Fiona asked. We need to see a list of all the items that were taken. Jolene opened the laptop again. Maybe I can look in the police database, or someone can sweet-talk that information out of Brody. It's possible they just grabbed whatever they could, or they took all the items to camouflage the one they were really after. So no one would guess what the relic really is? Celeste asked. Jolene nodded as she tapped on the keyboard. Do you girls think the people that attacked you are the same ones who broke in? Jake asked. We're not sure, Morgan replied. It doesn't seem likely that they would come back so soon. Unless they found something in the items they took that pointed to the cornerstone, Fiona added. We know whoever attacked us wasn't with the licorice killer because he'd already been to the cornerstone, Fiona said. So, that means either the licorice killer broke in, or there are 3 groups after the darn thing,